The ungrateful stars. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the Great Hall of Meridian Prime and watched the future of humanity being decided by creatures who had never bothered to learn her name. The hall was massive, built 12,000 years ago by species that now sat in floating chairs and looked down at her with cold eyes. She was the only human in the room. She had never felt more alone. The galactic concord had existed for millennia, before humans ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. 47 species had joined together to create peace among the stars. They had built jump gates that could send ships across the galaxy in moments. They had created laws and trade routes and a civilization that stretched across 1,000,000 worlds. Humanity had joined only 200 years ago. In the eyes of these ancient races, humans were children. Worse than children. They were useful children who did not know their place. The Velthrani delegate rose to speak. His body was made of living crystal, and light passed through him like water through glass. His voice was cold and musical, like wind through ice. Humanity has proven itself unstable, he said. Their emotions cloud their judgment. Their culture is primitive. Their contribution to the Concord is minimal at best. I propose we reduce their voting rights to observer status. They may watch, they may not decide. Elena felt her hands shake. She pressed them flat against her sides and kept her face calm. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in this room was a mistake. They would use it against her. They always did. The vote took less than an hour. 38 species voted yes. 9 voted no. Humanity lost its voice in the Concord. Elena walked out of the hall with her head held high. She did not cry. She did not scream. She went to her quarters and sat in the dark for a long time. Then she opened a communication channel to Earth. They have made their choice, she said, awaiting instructions. On Earth, the message arrived in the middle of the night. Within hours, the United Terran Council gathered in emergency session. The room was full of tired faces and angry hearts. These were the leaders of humanity, and they had just been told their people did not matter. Admiral James Okonkwo stood at the front of the room. He was old now, his hair gray and his face lined with scars from 3 wars. He had fought in each of those wars for the conquered. He had watched human soldiers die on alien worlds to protect species that now voted to silence them. For 200 years, he said, we have bled for ungrateful stars. We have asked only for respect. They have given us contempt. The room was silent. Every eye was on him. We maintain their jump gates, he continued. We keep the network running. The original builders are gone. No one else understands the old machines like we do. We learned. We studied. We fixed what was broken while they forgot how it worked. He paused. His voice grew harder. Our diplomats serve as mediators between species that have hated each other for 10,000 years. Our emotions that they mock, that is empathy. That is the ability to understand what others feel. That is why we can make peace where they cannot. He looked around the room at the faces of his fellow humans. Our soldiers form the heart of the peacekeeping corps. We take the missions no one else will take. We hold the lines no one else will hold. We die in the dark so others can live in the light. Admiral Okonkwo placed his hands on the table. And our traders? They travel the dangerous routes. They bring medicine to colonies that would otherwise be forgotten. They do this not for profit, but because it is right. He stood straight and tall. We have given everything to the Concord, and in return, they have taken away our voice. Perhaps it is time they learned what our absence means. The vote was unanimous. Every member of the council agreed. The Terran withdrawal protocol was activated. The news spread across human space like fire. Workers on distant stations received messages from home. Soldiers in the peacekeeping corps got their orders. Traders turned their ships around. Diplomats packed their bags. Elena Vasquez received the message while she was still on Meridian Prime. She read it 3 times to make sure she understood. Then she did something she had not done in years. She smiled. The next morning, she requested time to address the assembly one final time. The Veltrani delegate almost refused, but the old protocols demanded that departing ambassadors be given the chance to speak. He could not deny her without breaking tradition. Elena stood in the same spot where she had stood the day before. This time she was not afraid. This time she knew she was not alone. "We came to you with open hands," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "We asked for nothing but partnership. You saw our kindness as weakness. You saw our patience as stupidity. You saw our sacrifice as obligation." She looked at the Veltrani delegate. He looked away. "Very well," Elena said. "We release you from the burden of our presence. May you find the peace you claim we disrupted." She touched her credential badge and deactivated it. The light went dark. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, there was silence. Some of the delegates looked confused. Others looked amused. A few looked worried, but most of them looked at each other and shrugged. Humans were emotional creatures. This was just another tantrum. They would be back in a week, begging for forgiveness. They were wrong. Across the galaxy, human ships began moving toward the borders of Terran space. They moved in an orderly fashion, following schedules and protocols. There was no chaos. There was no anger. There was only quiet determination. The last human ship crossed into Terran space on Galactic Standard Date 4891.267. Behind it, the border stations went dark. The humans were gone, and the galaxy was about to learn what it had lost. The quiet departure chief engineer Marcus Chen had worked on Jumpgate Epsilon 7 for 15 years. He knew every wire, every circuit, every strange piece of ancient technology that the original builders had left behind. He had spent countless nights fixing problems that no one else could solve. He had done it because it mattered. He had done it because he cared. Now, he had 1 week left. His replacement was a Korvathi named Seleth. The Korvathi were insect-like creatures with 6 arms and compound eyes. They believed they were the most intelligent species in the galaxy. They told everyone this at every opportunity. Marcus spent his final week trying to teach Seleth everything he knew. He showed him the main control systems. He explained the power regulators. He pointed out the 40 different backup systems that Marcus had installed himself over the years, systems that were not in any manual. Systems that Marcus had added because he noticed small problems that could become big problems. Seleth barely listened. "You organics make everything so complicated," he said, waving 2 of his arms in dismissal. "The mathematics are elementary. I do not need a human to explain basic engineering to me." Marcus did not argue. He had learned long ago that arguing with Korvathi was pointless. Instead, he simply finished his documentation. He wrote down everything he knew, every repair, every modification, every trick he had learned. He left it all in a file for Seleth to read. On his last day, Marcus stood at the airlock of the station. Seleth came to see him off. It was a formality, nothing more. "Good luck," Marcus said. He extended his hand. Seleth looked at the hand for a moment, then touched it briefly with one of his appendages. "Luck is a human concept. We prefer competence." Marcus nodded. He stepped onto the transport and did not look back. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were happening everywhere. Dr. Amara Osei had spent 30 years studying the crystal plague that affected the Veltrani. It was a terrible disease that could shatter their crystalline bodies from the inside. Amara had developed treatments that saved thousands of lives. She had documented everything in careful detail. Before she left, she transferred all of her research to the Veltrani Medical Council. 30 years of work, 30 years of study, 30 years of trying to help a species that had just voted to silence her people. The council received her files. A junior official looked at them briefly, then pressed a button. "Human speculation," he said. "Delete it." 30 years of research vanished in an instant. Captain Diego Reyes commanded a peacekeeping unit in the Kethrani Corridor. The corridor was a border region where two species had been fighting for centuries. Diego and his soldiers had kept the peace for 80 years. They had stood between the two sides and refused to let them kill each other. Now they were leaving. Diego gathered his soldiers on the morning of their departure. Most of them were young. Most of them had never known a life without the Concord. They looked confused and sad. "We did good work here," Diego told them. "We kept the peace. We saved lives. Remember that. No matter what happens next, remember that we did what was right." They boarded their transports and flew away. Behind them, the two sides of the Kethrani corridor looked at each other across the empty space where the humans used to stand. Within hours, the shooting started. Merchant Captain Yuki Tanaka made her final supply run to the rimward colonies. These were small settlements on the edge of known space. They were far from the main trade routes. They were dangerous to reach. Most species refused to go there. Humans went there anyway. Yuki brought medicine, food, spare parts, and hope. She had been making this run for 20 years. She knew the colonists by name. She knew their children and their grandchildren. "Stock up," she warned them. "Store everything you can. It might be a long time before anyone comes this way again." The colonists laughed. "You humans and your worrying," said the colony leader, a large being with blue skin and 4 arms. "Someone else will come. There is always someone." Yuki did not argue. She hugged the children who came to say goodbye. She gave them candy and small toys she had brought from Earth. Then she flew away. She cried for the first 3 hours of the journey home. Back on Meridian Prime, the Concord media covered the human withdrawal with amusement. News programs showed clips of human ships leaving and made jokes about emotional tantrums. Experts appeared to explain that humans had always been unstable. This was simply proof. "The galaxy functioned for 12,000 years before humans," said the Velthrani ambassador in an interview. "It will function for 12,000 more after they have sulked themselves into irrelevance." The audience laughed. They laughed a lot in those days. No one noticed the small things. No one noticed that the jump gates needed daily adjustments that humans had been making quietly for centuries. No one noticed that the trade routes humans traveled were the ones no one else wanted. No one noticed that the peace in dozens of border regions was maintained by human diplomats working in small offices far from the cameras. No one counted the 847 minor roles that humans filled across the Concord. Jobs so small they were not worth recording. Jobs so essential that everything would fall apart without them. The humans knew. They had always known. But they had done those jobs anyway because they believed in the Concord. They believed in partnership. They believed that if they worked hard enough and gave enough, they would eventually earn respect. They had been wrong. The last transport crossed into Terran space on a quiet morning. The border stations powered down. The communication channels closed. The humans were gone. In the Great Hall of Meridian Prime, the delegates returned to their normal business. They discussed trade and treaties and the same arguments they had been having for 12,000 years. None of them looked at the empty seat where the human ambassador used to sit. None of them noticed that the lights in the hall flickered slightly, just for a moment, as a circuit somewhere in the station began to fail. None of them noticed that the first cracks had already appeared in the foundation of their world. They would notice soon enough. The silence that screamed. 3 months after the humans left, Jump Gate Epsilon 7 began to scream. Seleth was working alone when the alarm started. Red lights flashed across every console. Warning messages filled every screen. Something was wrong with the harmonic stabilizers, something that Seleth had never seen before. He ran the diagnostics exactly as Marcus Chen had shown him. The readings made no sense. Numbers appeared that should have been impossible. The gate was shaking itself apart. and Seleth did not know why. He pulled up the documentation that Marcus had left behind. He read the first page, then he read the second page. Then he felt his blood run cold. The documentation referenced 40 additional systems, 40 systems that Marcus had installed over 15 years, 40 systems that were not in any official manual. Seleth had never looked at them. He had not even known they existed. Marcus had been doing 2 jobs. He had been doing his official work, and he had been quietly fixing dozens of other problems that no one else noticed. He had done this work without praise or recognition. He had done it simply because it needed to be done. And now Seleth had no idea how any of it worked. The gate failed during peak transit hours. 14 ships were trying to pass through when the dimensional field collapsed. The ships were torn apart in an instant. 6,000 beings died in a flash of light. The news spread quickly. Jump Gate Epsilon 7 was closed for repairs, but the repairs were slow. The engineers who came to fix it could not understand the systems that Marcus had built. They had to start from nothing. It would take 2 years to fix. 2 years without a major transit route. Trade would be disrupted. Colonies would be cut off. Economies would suffer. And Epsilon 7 was just the beginning. In the Kathrani corridor, the war had spread beyond anyone's imagination. Captain Diego Reyes and his soldiers had held the peace for 80 years. Without them, 80 years of hatred came flooding back. Both sides blamed the other. Both sides attacked first. Villages were burned. Cities were bombed. Refugees fled in every direction, desperate to escape the violence. They ran toward conquered space, expecting to find help waiting for them. In the old days, human aid ships would have been there already. Humans always arrived first at disasters. It was something they were known for. But the aid ships did not come. The Concord sent messages of concern. They held meetings to discuss the crisis. They formed committees to study the problem, but no one actually went to help. The refugees died by the millions. They died in broken ships. They died in overcrowded camps. They died waiting for help that never came. On the rimward colonies, the situation was even worse. Captain Yuki Tanaka had warned them to stock up. They had laughed at her. Now they were not laughing anymore. The medicine ran out first, then the spare parts, then the food. The colonists sent distress calls to the Concord, but no one answered. The trade routes to the rim were too dangerous. The profits were too small. No one wanted to risk their ships. The humans had risked their ships. The humans had made the journey for 20 years. But the humans were gone. 3 colonies died in the first month. Their distress beacons kept broadcasting long after the last colonist was dead. No one came to turn them off. On Velthrani Prime, the Crystal Plague returned. It started in a small city on the southern continent. A few dozen cases at first. The local doctors tried to treat it with the old methods. The old methods did not work. The plague spread quickly. Thousands became sick, then tens of thousands. The crystalline bodies of the Velthrani began to crack and shatter from the inside. The medical council searched their databases for research on the plague. They found nothing useful, nothing modern, nothing that could help. One junior official remembered the files that Dr. Amara Osei had sent. 30 years of research, treatments that had saved thousands of lives. He searched for the files. They had been deleted. Human speculation. Gone forever. The plague killed the High Crystallum of Velthrani within 3 weeks. The most important religious leader of the Velthrani people, dead from a disease that a human doctor had learned to treat. High Arbiter Thesson of the Concord called an emergency session of the Assembly. The Great Hall was full of frightened faces and pointing fingers. The Korvathi blamed the Velthrani for driving the humans away. The Velthrani blamed the Korvathi for failing to maintain the gates. The Merchants Guild demanded that someone take over the human trade routes. No one volunteered. "This is temporary," insisted the Velthrani ambassador. "These are isolated problems. We will adapt." But they could not adapt. They had built their civilization on a foundation they did not understand. The humans had been that foundation. The humans had done 1,000 small jobs that no one noticed. Now those jobs were not being done, and everything was falling apart. A young Velthrani named Kieran had been given the task of understanding what had happened. She was a crystallographer, a scientist, but she had been ordered to study the human withdrawal and its effects. She spent weeks reading records and interviewing officials. What she found terrified her. Humans had filled 847 minor roles across the Concord. Small jobs, unimportant jobs, jobs that paid little and offered no glory. But every single one of those jobs was connected to something essential. The human who calibrated the water recyclers on Station 12. The human who mediated trade disputes in the Outer Arm. The human who maintained the backup power systems on Meridian Prime itself. They were gone. All of them. And no one had trained replacements because no one had thought their jobs mattered. "They were the mortar between our bricks," Kieran wrote in her report. "We never noticed them because they made everything work seamlessly. Now the walls are falling, and we cannot remember how to mix cement." She submitted her report to High Arbiter Thesson. The Arbiter read it in silence. Then she ordered it classified. The official position remained unchanged. "The situation is temporary. We will adapt." But in her private chambers, Thesson sat alone in the dark and wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. Outside her window, the lights of Meridian Prime flickered again. Another circuit failing. Another problem that no one knew how to fix. The silence where humans used to be was growing louder every day. Harvest of Hubris. 1 year after the humans left, the Galactic Concord was dying. The jump gate network operated at 34% capacity. More than half of the gates had failed or were too dangerous to use. Repair teams worked day and night. But they could not keep up. Every time they fixed one gate, 2 more would break. Species that had traded for thousands of years found themselves cut off from each other. Ships that once crossed the galaxy in hours now took months to reach their destinations. The safe routes were crowded and slow. The dangerous routes were deadly. The galactic economy collapsed. Factories closed because they could not get raw materials. Farms failed because they could not ship their food. Billions of beings lost their jobs. Billions more lost their homes. Famine spread through the colonies. Worlds that had depended on human supply chains began to starve. They sent desperate messages to the core worlds, begging for help. The core worlds had their own problems. The peacekeeping corps, now entirely non-human, refused to deploy to dangerous zones. Their new commanders looked at the casualty reports from the old human missions and decided it was not worth the risk. "We are peacekeepers, not soldiers," they said. "We cannot be expected to die for others." The humans had been expected to die for others. The humans had done it without complaint. Now the border regions burned while the peacekeeping corps sat in their comfortable stations and waited for orders that never came. High Arbiter Thesson faced an assembly that had fallen into chaos. The delegates no longer pretended to respect each other. They screamed and threatened and accused. The ancient protocols of the Concord were forgotten. The Korvathi delegation presented an analysis that shocked everyone. They had studied human behavior in detail. They had examined every record, every report, every piece of data they could find. "We were wrong about everything," the Korvathi delegate admitted. His voice was quiet. He would not meet anyone's eyes. Their emotional instability was actually sophisticated social intelligence. Their recklessness was calculated risk assessment. Their stubbornness was reliability. He paused. The hall was silent. Every trait we mocked was a strength. Every weakness we saw was actually a virtue. We did not merely undervalue them. We built our civilization upon their labor and then convinced ourselves they contributed nothing. He looked around the room at the faces of the other delegates. We are not merely fools. We are architects of our own ruin. No one argued with him. No one could. Meanwhile, telescopes trained on Terran space showed something unexpected. The scientists who operated those telescopes did not want to believe what they were seeing. They checked their instruments again and again. Human civilization was thriving. Freed from the burden of maintaining the Concord's infrastructure, humanity had turned inward. They had focused on their own people, their own worlds, their own future, and they had flourished. New colonies appeared on worlds that had once been considered too difficult to settle. Human ships grew faster and more advanced. Their stations became larger and more beautiful. Their technology leaped forward at a pace that seemed impossible. The humans were not waiting to be invited back. They were not sitting in the dark, feeling sorry for themselves. They were building something new, something better, something that did not need the Concorde at all. Crystallographer Chiron studied the telescope data with growing despair. She had been one of the first to understand what humanity's departure would mean. She had tried to warn the assembly. No one had listened. Now she watched the humans build their future while the Concorde crumbled around her. She requested permission to address the assembly. After much delay, permission was granted. "We must apologize," she said. Her crystalline body glowed with the intensity of her conviction. "We must admit we were wrong. We must invite the humans to return and offer them the respect they deserve." She was shouted down immediately. "We do not beg lesser species for help," thundered an elderly Velthrani. His body was cracked with age, and his light was dim, but his pride was still strong. "We have survived for 12,000 years without humans. We will survive 12,000 more." Kieran looked at him with something close to pity. "Then we die with our pride intact," she said. "How noble." The session ended in deadlock. The assembly could not agree on anything. Some wanted to reach out to the humans. Others refused to admit there was a problem. Still others blamed each other for the disaster. But quietly, away from the cameras and the speeches, individual species began sending messages to Terran space. They were careful messages, worded to avoid admitting fault. They hinted at possible negotiations. They suggested that perhaps there had been misunderstandings. The messages went unanswered. Human border stations received the transmissions. Human operators logged them and filed them away. No response was sent. No acknowledgement was given. The Concorde had made its choice 3 years ago. The humans had accepted that choice. They were not interested in going back to the way things were. High Arbiter Thesson read the reports of unanswered messages with a heavy heart. She was old now, older than she had ever expected to live. The stress of the past year had aged her terribly. Her scales were gray and her eyes were tired. She had been Arbiter for 40 years. She had guided the Concorde through crises and conflicts. She had always found a way forward. Now there was no way forward. There was only the slow collapse of everything she had spent her life building. She looked out her window at Meridian Prime. The great station was still beautiful, but it was wounded now. Sections had been closed because they could not be maintained. Lights flickered in districts where power was unreliable. The traffic of ships was a fraction of what it once had been. The Concorde was dying, and the humans were watching from a distance, content to let it die. Thesson made a decision. It was the hardest decision of her life. She called for her personal ship to be prepared. She would go to Terran space herself. She would humble herself before the humans. She would beg if she had to. She had no other choice. The long walk home. 3 years after the humans left, High Arbiter Thesson crossed into Terran space alone. Her ship was small and unarmed. She had left her guards behind. She had left her advisors behind. This was not a diplomatic mission. This was an old woman going to beg for mercy. Human patrol ships found her within minutes of crossing the border. Their sensors had tracked her approach for days. Their weapons locked onto her ship before she could even send a greeting. "Identify yourself and state your purpose," said a calm human voice over the communication channel. "I am High Arbiter Thesson of the Galactic Concord," she replied. "I have come to speak with your leaders. Please, I have come to listen." There was a long pause. Then the voice returned. "Follow the escort ships. Do not deviate from the assigned course. You will be taken to Earth." The journey took 3 days. Thesson spent those days looking out her window at human space. What she saw amazed her. The humans had built so much in 3 years. Stations gleamed in the darkness between stars. Ships moved in steady streams along trade routes. Colonies sparkled on worlds that telescopes had shown as empty just a few years ago. They had not been waiting. They had been working. They had been building a future that did not include the Concord. Earth was beautiful. Thesson had seen images of the human homeworld before, but the images did not capture its life. Oceans covered much of the surface, brilliant blue in the sunlight. Clouds drifted across continents of green and brown and gold. Cities sparkled like jewels along the coastlines. She landed in a city called Geneva. Once, long ago, humans had gathered here to discuss peace among themselves. Now they gathered here to discuss peace among the stars. The United Terran Council met her in a large room with windows that looked out over a lake. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks covered with snow. The room was simple and elegant. There were no floating chairs, no ancient decorations, no symbols of power. Just humans sitting at a table, waiting for her to speak. Admiral James Okonkwo was there. He was old now, older than when Thesson had last seen him, but his eyes were still sharp. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat beside him. Her hair was gray, and her face was lined, but she sat with the same quiet dignity she had shown in the assembly 3 years ago. Thesson stood before them. She had planned speeches. She had prepared arguments. But standing in that room, looking at the faces of the people her civilization had wronged, all her words disappeared. "You could have stopped this," she said finally. Her voice was weak. "You could have returned. Billions are dead. Billions more are suffering. You could have helped." Admiral Okonkwo nodded slowly. His face showed no anger, only weariness. "We could have," he agreed. "But you needed to learn. You needed to understand that kindness is not weakness. Service is not servitude. You needed to feel the weight of what you dismissed." Thesson felt tears forming in her eyes. She had not cried in 50 years. "The dead," she whispered. "The suffering." "Yes." Okonkwo's voice was heavy with grief. "That is the price of your lesson, not ours. We offered you partnership. You demanded tribute. We offered you friendship. You gave us contempt. The dead are not on our hands, Arbiter. They are on yours." Thesson had no argument. She had come to negotiate from strength. She had no strength. She had nothing but shame and desperation. Ambassador Vasquez spoke next. Her voice was gentle but firm. "We will not return to what was. The old Concord is dead. It deserved to die. But humanity has never turned away from those who genuinely seek help, not from pride, but from principle." She slid a document across the table toward Thesson. "These are our terms." Thesson read the document slowly. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. Full recognition of human equality, not as a courtesy, but as constitutional law. Never again would humans be dismissed as lesser beings. Human oversight of critical infrastructure, the jump gates, the trade networks, the systems that held civilization together. Humans would manage them, and they would be properly compensated and respected. A formal public acknowledgement of humanity's role. Every species in the Concord would admit what humans had done for them. Every species would apologize for how humans had been treated. And finally, the Concord itself would dissolve. It would be reformed as a new organization, built on genuine partnership, no more ancient hierarchies, no more species looking down on others, equality for all. Thesson looked up from the document. Her tears had dried. In their place was something that might have been hope. "If I agree to this," she said, "will you help us?" "Yes," said Okonkwo. "We will help you rebuild. We will teach you what we know. We will stand beside you as partners, not servants." He leaned forward. "But we will never forget. And we will make certain the galaxy never forgets what contempt costs." Thesson signed the document. 5 years later, the Galactic Commonwealth was born. The founding ceremony was held on Meridian Prime, in the same great hall where humanity had been silenced so long ago. The hall had been repaired now. Human engineers had fixed the systems that no one else understood. Human workers had restored the beauty that had been lost. The new constitution was read aloud to representatives of 47 species. At its heart was a simple principle that humans had tried to teach by example. No species stands alone. No contribution is minor. The chain is only as strong as the link we most neglect. Crystallographer Chiron watched the human delegation take their seats. They did not sit at the back. They did not sit as junior members. They sat as equals in the center of the hall where they belonged. After the ceremony, Chiron approached Admiral Okonkwo. He was retired now, but he had come to witness this moment. He stood by a window, looking out at the stars. "Do you hate us?" Chiron asked. "For what we did?" Okonkwo considered the question for a long moment. His face was peaceful. "No," he said at last. "Hate requires energy we would rather spend building. But we remember. And we will make certain the galaxy never forgets." He extended his hand toward her. Chiron looked at it. She remembered Seleth, the Korvathi engineer who had refused to learn from Marcus Chen. She remembered the deleted research files. She remembered the dead. She took his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for coming back." Okonkwo smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "That is what humans do," he said. "We help. Even when we are not appreciated, even when we are not thanked. We help because it is right." He turned back to the window. The stars stretched out before them, beautiful and endless. "But it is nice," he added quietly, "to finally be appreciated." Chiron stood beside him in silence. Together, they watched the ships of the new Commonwealth beginning their journeys. The stars were grateful at last.